You know what time it is when you hear my voice. When the market turns red, most bulls disappear. The predators don't. I've been in many bear markets, and some of you are new here. Some of you don't understand how bear markets work. Predators live in these kind of regions, and I kept on telling you again and again and again that the price will continue to go lower, but you didn't want to listen to me. Instead, most of you are more interested in a beautiful lie. And here we are again, living in a simulation. I know it's driving you mad. You can't believe this. With all the bullish news out there in the world, with all the bullish news, you have the Clarity Act. We have Michael Saylor buying by the boatload. And traditional markets are at an all-time new high. Crypto is nowhere to be seen. We're in a brutal bear market, and it's not going to end pretty. I sold almost at the top. I bought at 61,000 US dollars and some change. I took some profits at 80,000 US dollars. We're playing the same thing that we played back in 2022. I don't look at any news. I just look at green and red candles. Show me the charts and I'll tell you the news. We formed a dead cat bounce in 2026. In 2022, we formed a dead cat bounce. We swept the highs right over here, formed an upthrust. Likewise, we swept the highs and formed an upthrust right over here. We fell down, cascaded down, fell down, cascaded down, formed a selling climax. We formed distribution with an upthrust. In 2022, we formed a distribution with a final upthrust. Everyone back then was calling for higher prices. We headed down into this trend line, and every bulltard kept on saying, just buy the dip, bro. Just buy the dip. Likewise, in 2022, they kept on saying the same things. Buy the dip, bro. And we broke down. Once we broke down, we made further selling climax. Likewise, the same thing happened. We cascaded down. We were hit with a curveball. And we thought that this right over here was selling climax, just like this period here. We formed a trend line right over here, thinking that the fractal will play out. However, all the dirty bulltards laughed in my face. I'm gonna have the last laugh. We didn't, unfortunately, break down. Instead, what we found is Michael Saylor decided to buy. And you all know that Michael Saylor is price insensitive. He's a top indicator. I've been right like 90% of the time. This is the next stage of the market. There's a trend line right over here and a trend line right over here, followed by a trend line over here and a trend line right over here. We had selling climax again. We oscillated between these two ranges, these two trend lines. Then we finally broke out. Likewise, the same thing happened. We oscillated between here and we broke out. From the trough to the peak, we went up a whopping 40%. Likewise, in this current cycle, we've gone up a whopping 38%. I did say to all the bulltards, but they didn't want to listen, that selling climax is imminent. This could be the very top. I was looking for 85,000 US dollars. How poetic would it be? A random guy on the internet just freestyled entire bear market. We're forming a megaphone, yeah? And a megaphone is bearish, okay? It's actually bearish. It's not bullish, guys. We could do something like this, where we head up higher, and then something like this, guys, yeah? And that's all she wrote. And the counter trend rally stopped at 85,000 US dollars and some change. Let's have a closer inspection. And we're gonna head over to the 4-hourly chart. What do you notice? What do you see? What do you notice? Look very carefully. Now, ladies and gentlemen, there's a trend line that goes all the way down here. It kissed it a few times, and I know some of you struggle with basic maths. So we kissed it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then finally broke down. The trend is getting weaker. It kissed this area right over here. I was hoping for one final upthrust to 85,000 US dollars. MicroStrategy is doing the exact same thing as previous cycle. We formed an upthrust in 2022, ladies and gentlemen. We formed an upthrust in 2026. In 2022, we broke down past all the moving averages. 2026, we broke down past all the moving averages. We hit this trend line, and in 2022, we hit this trend line. We bounced in 2022, we formed a right shoulder. Likewise, in this cycle, we bounced and formed a right shoulder. Then everyone panicked, all the sellers stepped in. No one was left to buy their bags. Boo-hoo. We hurdled down during this cycle. In the previous cycle, we'd done the same thing, ladies and gentlemen. We hurdled down. The exception is this right over here. We had a brief bounce, formed a dead cat bounce, and then hurdled down. But ultimately, the selling pressure, the most selling pressure, was this period here. Likewise, in this cycle, the most selling pressure is this period here. We cascaded down from the top all the way to the bottom. That was a mighty 35% in a blink of an eye. Likewise, in the previous cycle, we hurdled down, and that was a mighty 84% drop. And here's the kicker, ladies and gentlemen. I swear I can't make this up. We dropped and recovered at the same area, just above the 200 moving average. I did say in a previous episode that we're gonna top, and it has. Do you need me to tell you what happens next, or you bulltards are not interested in the truth? You rather listen to a beautiful, sweet lie. If I zoom in, like really zoom in, ladies and gentlemen, we formed a double bottom. I believe that MicroStrategy in the last cycle formed a slightly higher low. In this current cycle, I'm looking for something similar, but the kicker is actually the Bitcoin pair. Now, if I overlay Bitcoin to this, ladies and gentlemen, Bitcoin actually bottomed first. Believe it or not, Bitcoin bottomed first. Shortly after, MicroStrategy bottomed later. Some of you have seen how I destroyed Tau holders. I've shown you what's going to happen in the future for Tau, but you don't want to listen to me. This is Bitcoin monthly at the top. This is Zcash, the next trendy coin that's ultimately going to go down to zero, because you know how this game works. I've shown you guys how this game works. Look what happened to Tau. I prophesize what will happen to Tau, but you don't want to believe me. Anyway, so we have these two charts. Now, Tau is interesting because it has a correlation to Bitcoin for now. Every time Zcash tops, Bitcoin also tops. Again, in 2018, it topped. In 2021, there was another top. Again, a further top. And in this current cycle, ladies and gentlemen, we have one top here and another second top. I know most of you bulltards don't believe me, ladies and gentlemen. I know that. I can tell. But there are over hundreds of thousands of charts in crypto, ladies and gentlemen. All you need to do is look to the past to tell you the future. Now, on my left is WIF, on my right, Zcash. It formed an upthrust right over here. Then, ladies and gentlemen, we headed into this trend line right over here. It dropped from the peak to the trough 78%. Zcash formed an upthrust, ladies and gentlemen, done I think around an 8 or 10x, maybe 20x. And then, ladies and gentlemen, we headed down into this area, this trend line right over here. Now do the maths. From the peak to the trough, oh my, 77%. WIF headed up higher, almost tagged the absolute high. Zcash has some more room to go, ladies and gentlemen. Tag this area one final time, and the rest, my friends, is history. In last week's episode, you know what I said. You all know what I said. And you know what time it is. Predators live in this region, my friends. Ethereum is doing the same thing. Back then, there was the whole FTX scandal. There was Luna. Yeah, Ethereum is doing exactly the same thing. You can't make this up. No, some of you are driving yourselves mad. This cycle was an upthrust. This over here in 2022 was an upthrust. We hurdled down, formed selling climax. Likewise, hurtled down and formed selling climax. We headed into distribution, formed an upthrust. Headed into distribution and formed an upthrust. We broke down into this diagonal trend line and finally broke down. Likewise, the same thing happened. Picture perfect, broke the diagonal trend line. We were wrong during this period, ladies and gentlemen, because we thought that it was going to do the same thing as previously. However, it continued to go up higher and higher. It was invalidated. Therefore, we moved on to this stage of the market. And it looks exactly or very, very similar to this period here. Ethereum is showing weakness at the moment. It formed selling climax. Likewise, the same thing, selling climax. We went from peak to trough during that cycle of around 129%. However, Ethereum is possibly a leading indicator to Bitcoin. It only went up 40%. We did say on this channel that in the previous cycle, Ethereum done something remarkably different. It formed a higher low. Likewise, Ethereum might in this cycle form a higher low. Oh my, oh my. I predicted this, ladies and gentlemen. I told you, as soon as it breaks this trend line, we're gonna be in a raging bull market for oil. At the moment, we're forming a bull flag, a textbook bull flag. But you didn't want to believe me, did you? Many folks got oil wrong. I kept quiet because you all know what my target is for oil. DXY, and this is important because it's a reflection on USDT. Now this, ladies and gentlemen, I've heard so many people calling the death of the dollar. The dollar is dead, it's dying, it's just consolidating. It will form higher highs very shortly. USDT dominance. It swept the lows, and now is heading up higher, ladies and gentlemen. Every time USDT dominance goes up, well, guess what happens to Bitcoin? It goes down. Participants sell their crypto, their Bitcoin, into stable coins, and they move their stable coins into their bank. And that's why USDT is burnt. SPX looks remarkably similar to 2018. During that time, we went down by 11%. Likewise, in January, we also went down by around 10%. We continued to form higher highs, while Bitcoin remarkably went nowhere. Then finally, in September, everything came crashing down. From the very peak to the trough, we went down by around 30%. Likewise, the same thing could happen. But there is a lot of similarities to another period. Now this period is going to be far more detrimental to all of us. During these big crashes, ladies and gentlemen, what tends to happen during these periods is a long distribution phase where we ultimately stay in the same relative area. And finally, after all the elites have distributed and sold, then it goes down. So we can see SPX continue to oscillate around here, maybe have one final upthrust, and then ultimately in September, October, Q4, ladies and gentlemen, that's when the fat lady sings. The S&P 500 is not seeing a broad participation in stocks. It's very narrow at the moment. And likewise in 2018, it was pretty much similar. The bond market kept on rising higher and higher, and risk assets kept on suffering. It wasn't until we had something break during Q4 that we saw risk assets see a resurgence. Now at the moment, ladies and gentlemen, majority of crypto is struggling because we have interest rates at higher elevated prices. Now the catch-22 is that the Fed is between a rock and a hard place. Do they cut interest rates, make interest rates hurtle down, but boost inflation? Now we don't do TA. You're not supposed to do TA in the bond market, ladies and gentlemen. But this, ladies and gentlemen, dare I say it, is a bull flag. It looks like we're about to break out. All across the bond market is green. everywhere. And this isn't a good sign for risk assets. What is happening currently right now is not a phenomenon. We've seen this in the past many times, ladies and gentlemen. What is simply happening is riskier assets are bleeding to less riskier assets, such as gold, such as commodities, copper, the S&P 500, and so on and so forth. Larger cap stocks, whereas majority of crypto is continuing to bleed. That changes when something breaks. Something has to break, ladies and gentlemen, for you to see your risk assets go up higher. While crypto bros still haven't capitulated, the entire rest of the market is doing remarkably well. The majority of crypto markets are a scam. Like 90% of them are actual scams with fake market caps, all wash trading and governed by majority of market makers. No one's actually buying this except for a handful of coins that I am accumulating. These coins have actually been going up during a bear market. Now everyone's a genius during a bull market. Come try and make money in a bear market. See you in the next one. Peace.